Before we get into the video, if you are familiar with this channel and still haven't subscribed, consider subscribing. And if you're new to the channel, stick around to the end of this video for ways that you can support me. As always, thank you for watching. As is apparently the standard for this channel, we are yet again playing another game about a naked man walking through hell. Scorn has been a highly anticipated game for horror fans for 8 years, and it's finally out. First off, I'm not sure why so many people were so adamant to say this game was dead or vaporware or something just because it had a long dev time. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but 4 to 8 years is basically the average time of a full dev cycle nowadays. We aren't living in the early 90s anymore where a developer can put out a genre-defining video game and then release a masterpiece sequel to that game 1 year later. Shit's too complicated now. There's too much going on, and disgusting little gamer piglets like you simply demand too much. Please, pour the 4K Ultra HD textures into our slop buckets. Apart from taking almost a decade to release, there has also been some controversy over what the game looked like it was going to be in its trailer versus what the game actually was once it released, which, of course, is a story as old as media. So, let's get into the review and figure out what my opinion is on this entire thing, which is the opinion that will also be the objectively correct one. The original promise of Scorn was that it was going to be a horror game with an art style inspired by both H.R. Giger and Beksinski, which already kind of puts it on thin ice for me. Basing a game's art style on one or both of these artists seems like it's becoming kind of a trope to build hype more so than anything that realistically matters. I know that H.R. Giger and Beksinski both have art styles that produce a great vibe, but unfortunately, a good video game isn't something that can be based purely on vibes. You need to do a bunch of other shit too. There's this Souls-like game coming out that seems to be heavily based on Beksinski's work too, and I think depending on how this one goes, it's going to be the last time I give a shit about seeing either of these two names as bullet points in a game's description. Also, I know Beksinski's name isn't pronounced like this. I'm anglicizing it because I'm dumb and Polish is hard. That being said, Scorn's artmen did a great job of replicating the work of both of these guys, and the vibes are definitely there. When you're on the planet's surface, you get the most Beksinski part of the game, where eerie landscapes are given a sense of having infinite scale by the way they are both made up of vast repeating patterns and obscured by a dense fog. You have no idea how tall this is, so as far as you're concerned, it's tall forever. The alien ruins you spend the game wandering through are mostly Giger-based, and the weird sex shit that is required to really sell Giger-inspired work is all there. I'll talk a little bit more about how the art folds into the story later, but for now I just wanted to press the point that even though I just talked a bunch of shit about how it's becoming kind of hacky to cite inspiration from the funny Swiss maniac and his funny Polish friend, this time the guys in charge of getting the core identity of these two artists to work together actually nailed it perfectly. And now that I've said that, it's going to be so embarrassing if you paused the video earlier to complain in the comments about how I was being unfair to this game's art direction. So you better go back and delete that comment before I see it, and remember, I see them all. I am a human panopticon, and the stupid shit you say on the internet cannot escape my gaze. I am always watching, and I am always present, judging you and spreading the gospel of your ignorance. Let's talk about gameplay. For better or worse, Scorn is exactly what we can expect from pretty much any modern horror game. We have walking, we have puzzles, and we have diet combat. You wake up at the start of the game in a puddle of goo, and you need to make your way to some mysterious endpoint that the character is aware of, and you are not. You will spend most of the game trying to figure out convoluted alien technology and shooting chickens. This is not a game that is high in action, so if you were expecting Giger Resident Evil 2 or Beksinski Doom, you're playing the wrong game. As far as puzzles go, the best part about them is the game doesn't give you any obnoxious hints or fucking pop-up dialogue boxes to explain what's going on. You have to actually experiment and study the environment and engage with the game to figure it out. At its best, it's very satisfying to realize how the room you're in works and figure it out. At its worst, it feels like playing Alien Forklift Simulator. Scorn's core trinity of linear gameplay, puzzle solving, and gun shoot, I think is what has contributed to its semi-mixed reception. A game with these three traits is probably going to find itself somewhere on this 3-point spectrum that I just made up. Over on the left side, we have the walking simulator, over on the right side, we have the first-person shooter, and right here in the middle, we have horror survival. Where you thought Scorn was going to be on this spectrum is largely going to dictate how you felt about the game. If we go back and watch Scorn's trailers, I think it's fair to assume, based on the footage the developers chose to show, most people thought that Scorn was going to comfortably be in the center of this chart. I don't think anyone was dumb enough to think this was going to play like a Call of Duty campaign, and I doubt anyone expected the full-on walking simulator experience. It was pretty obvious that we were going to have puzzles, inventory management, and enough combat for it to be a problem the player needed to worry about, which are all important parts of the traditional survival horror formula. You don't make an inventory screen this insane unless you're planning on inventory management being a thing. Unfortunately, Scorn seems to have landed a little bit closer to about right here on this spectrum, and I think that is largely what has disappointed some people about its release. It's impossible to know what the original intent for Scorn was, and it's almost certain that some planned features and content had to be cut along the long 8-year path to its release. But if I had to guess, I'm not sure this was the original plan for Scorn, and I think the audience was able to intuit this. But over time, the reviews on Steam have gone from mixed to mostly positive, so if you think that matters at all, maybe people are starting to appreciate the experience for what it is. If you like shorter, slower, and more cerebral experiences over more tense, action-heavy survival horror, I think you'll probably enjoy Scorn. But I don't think this is going to be anyone's game of the year, and I'm not sure if it's going to be remembered by too many people a few years down the road. It wouldn't be a complete review on my part, however, if I didn't mention what is by far the game's strongest aspect, and that's its environmental storytelling. Scorn has no written lore defined, no dialogue, or anything that can provide context for what is going on in the game other than interpreting the world around you. Much like how, when you're looking at a Geiger piece or a Beksinski piece, there isn't anything to tell you what the fuck you're looking at. You just have to look at the art and try to figure it out on your own. At this point, the rest of the video is probably going to just be spoilers, so you've been warned. Right off the bat, it should be clear to anyone playing this game or even watching the trailers that what we're looking at here is a post-apocalypse setting where biotechnology has gone out of control. This civilization was using living biology to power a lot of their technology, and at some point, like a cancer, it decided it had its own plans. The next thing that becomes pretty obvious is that whatever society this was originally, it seems like a few people with the power were the ones that got to use their genetics to get this ball rolling. All the dead bodies look like clones, which suggests a limited gene pool, and I doubt the giant fuck temple at the end of the game was a place of equal opportunity. You can imagine that using a limited gene pool provided by a few dozen dudes with VR headsets getting jacked off by a robot to build technology like this would be a bad idea. It's like how when you're growing a bunch of monocrops that are basically clones of each other, and then some corn blight comes through and obliterates 80% of your corn supply because they all had the same immune problems. This theory is also backed up by all the gross little homunculus you meet along the way looking exactly like you. And also the big homunculus. Maybe you recognize him from his work in other films. Even if you look closely at some of the game's normal enemies, you can see traits of the player character. It's pretty clear that this entire biomass is derived from the genetic code of the species the player is, which is the species that built this huge biotech empire. Seems like what we probably have here is a society where the upper crust gets sucked off in the metaverse while all their goo is repurposed into being the genetic material that is used to keep the biotech empire running. Basically, this is Earth if Jeffrey Epstein would have won. We actually play as two different people over the course of the game. The first one only briefly before we get killed during the malfunction of this mechanism, and the second one who wakes up here. Eventually, you're attacked and have a massive parasite attach itself to your body, which most reads on the game agree that this parasite is a mutated version of the original player character. There is some debate here as to what this player swap actually means. Honestly, it's kind of clunky and fucks up the flow of the game a little bit. I don't think this was the best narrative move. Some people think that the player's consciousness somehow transfers to a new body. Interpret this however you want, I guess. It doesn't really matter. The longer we struggle toward the end of the game, the worse this parasite gets until its eventual removal leaves you gravely wounded and limping the last few yards to the promised land. And then the game ends with the parasite finding you again, this time stopping you for good and forcing you to be rooted in place a few feet away from your escape for who knows how many centuries. It's a pretty dark and unsatisfying ending that a lot of people hated. I get that this game is supposed to be grimdark, but something about this ending does feel off. Maybe it's just a pacing problem, and it feels like it all goes to shit in the last 30 seconds of gameplay, or maybe it feels like it was trying too hard to have an epic twist ending. For me, I think it was kind of a pacing thing. You don't really give a shit at all about this character by the end of the game, so when you get here, it feels like the game just sort of rips the keyboard and mouse out of your hands to give you a lecture instead of an ending. But the game doesn't really earn the lecture. So, I didn't ask about how sad this loser is now that he's a tree. Hello, it's me, Editing Jacob. I'm just now realizing that the entire plot of this game is literally just the frog and the scorpion. I probably could have done a whole thing about living in a society and how we're all in a crab bucket or whatever, but I don't fucking go to one of the other guys. Tell H Bomber Guy to make the society video. I'm done making the society videos, dude. I made one that was an hour and 45 minutes one time, and it sucked. I had to get blackout drunk and listen to Phil Collins afterwards, and that is real. That being said, I get what the point here is. The developers wanted a dark ending, and that's probably why they picked two of the most famously dark artists in recent memory to base their work on. I don't think it's a coincidence that the inner ruins are mostly Geiger-inspired, and the outer world is mostly Beksinski-inspired. Geiger's work is much more intimate and claustrophobic, and anyone familiar with it knows that I mean intimate with the entire spectrum of the word's meaning. When you look at a particularly complex piece of Geiger's work, it feels almost fractal, representing both humanity's maniacal march towards technologic progress at all costs, as well as our contradictory desire to maintain and pursue all of our most base animal instincts with no compromise. Geiger paints a dark parody of the human race, suffocating itself with endless, eldritch technology, too busy with its own narcissism to notice. His art is the perfect choice for reflecting an empire fallen on its own sword. Beksinski, on the other hand, tends to have much more of a sense of scale in his work. You see vast, desolate landscapes, towering structures, and even a portrait like this one is given some kind of an implied sense of immense scale. This is a perfect style to choose, not for representing a ruined civilization, but the ruined world around it. Geiger shows us the seething and choking cities, but Beksinski shows us the dead wilderness beyond. The two artists are two sides of the same grim coin. As it is in Beksinski's impossible expanses above, so it is in Geiger's coagulations of hubris below. This is the lesson of Scorn. It is a moving distillation of the work of these two artists, and while it might not be a particularly well-received video game, maybe it was trying to be something else. And if you want to see more videos like this one, please subscribe. Also, if you are subscribed, turning on notifications is very important. If you want to support the channel more directly, you can head over to the Patreon and subscribe for as little as $2 a month for some exclusive podcast content. My podcast, Inherently Optimistic, is also available pretty much anywhere, and new episodes are on the way. You can also support the channel by buying Scorn on GOG with my link in the description. And finally, you should follow me on Twitter for as long as it still exists so you don't miss any important updates. And there are some links to a Discord community down in the description as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.